afternoon, wherever in the world you may be. Welcome to this very special webinar as far as UNITAR and CIFAL Philippines are concerned. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, people may have been unfortunately put into a corner of their small world. This seclusion policy is, of course, brought about by the rationale of containing the spread of the coronavirus. But the big question is, could we really contain or put to a halt human mobility and migration? Containing migration is counternatural, isn't it? And mobility is a character of the human being. Restriction of borders can be stigmatizing, could be dangerous, and even discriminating. And unfortunately for some, it may even be a motivation to explore new ways of moving through unsafe and irregular pathways. To reduce exclusion, we want to pursue and to continue with being in touch with friends in UNITAR, with friends and guests that we have here, and with you, the rest of us who join us in this webinar. We want to pursue being in touch because we want to explore and continue conversation on what I call the SHE, the significant human experience, and the SHI, the significant human idea. For today, through this webinar, which is titled Migrant Storytelling, highlighting voices from around the world, we will do an innovation of further looking at and examining migration, human mobility issue. We are tired of looking at migration through drab and dry statistics, numbers, quantitative data, and we want to move toward a more interesting and innovative way of learning about migration through a real-life narration of personal accounts and experiences. Through our special experts and invited speakers today, who themselves are migrants moving around, two Filipinas, one is now in Europe, another one in Korea, a Zimbabwean who has moved to Europe and now to Southeast Asia, and someone who is Indian by birth and now American by residence. We would like to put flesh and the human texture to the narration and information on migration. We would like to hear their stories and be part of their storytelling. We will engage them in a conversation. And as we do so, and as we conduct this innovative way of conversation and exchanges, we hope to achieve two things. One is to contribute to what the United Nations Global Compact for Migration Target wants, and that is to produce evidence-based discourse and to come up with a discourse that would shape the perception of people around the world on migration. And our second objective is to contribute to the ongoing conversation of Sustainable Development Goal, specifically number 10. SDG 10 is about reduced inequalities, as our experts share the conversation with their focus on the migrants' experiences through storytelling. And therefore, with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. And I am extremely pleased to be constantly working, collaborating with the UN Institute for Training and Research in bringing forward to you this day's migrant storytelling, highlighting voices from around the world. Thank you, UNITAR. Thank you, experts. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Good day, everyone.
Sarah, if I may take the floor, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you, Alex.
Thank you very much. So my name is Alex Mejia. I'm a division director at the UNITAR base in Geneva. And I simply wanted to add to the voice already expressed and these excellent comments, Professor Cole, that for us at the United Nations, and particularly UNITAR, this is indeed a very important event. And it is important because we have to raise awareness about this topic. We have to hear what is the story, the power of storytelling, what the narrative of the people that are migrating under such conditions actually is. And I also wanted to add a number, perhaps. As you all know, as of last night, our colleagues at WHO had reported that more than 243 million people have been infected during this pandemic, already a year and a half and more. But the sad number is 5 million. It's almost shy of 5 million people that have died. That means that 5 million families have suffered or continue to suffer. And that means that this number includes very many migrants, people that out of desperation or necessity, indeed, as Dr. Ko say, needed to leave the place that they love to seek better future or safer futures. Now, this remembrance of all the people that have departed and how this is disproportionately affecting migration flows leads me also to postulate the objectives of today's webinar. Remember that the idea is to present innovative cases today, alternative forms of migrant storytelling, so we can inspire the public to contribute to a positive public discourse on migration, perhaps to better understand migrants and to provide answers and solutions. But it's 4 things. Allow me to read very short. Number 1, the first objective of this webinar today is answer the question, what are responsible ways of reporting to capture migrant experiences? Number 2, how are migrant stories represented? Number 3, what are the available platforms for migrants to share their stories and how can they access them? And number 4, what were the challenges and opportunities in migrant storytelling at the onset of the pandemic? It is important to focus on these objectives. It is important to actually get to share these narratives, as I said at the beginning. And to conclude, I simply want to thank not only Dr. Ko and her team out of the University of the Philippines and our training center, CFAC Philippines in Manila, but also the panelists that are with us today. It will be quite a unique conversation. And to all of you, dear participants joining us for very many countries, my respect and my appreciation. On behalf of the United Nations, please consider your friends in Geneva always willing to support this type of alternatives. And with that, we go back to you, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Dr. Ko, for this introduction. So thank you for introducing this webinar. As already mentioned, this is a result of a cooperation between UNITAR, the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, and the University of Philippines and CFAC Philippines. For this virtual discussion on creative initiatives, we count on the contribution of remarkable panelists, journalists, and international organization representatives who will share their experiences from around the world. Let me start with our first panelist, Ms. Ana Santos, multimedia journalist, who will share with us on reporting on migrant stories in action. Ms. Ana Santos, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I come to you from London, but my home country is the Philippines. I'm very happy to be here to share with you stories about labor migration. As a Filipino, and I think just about anyone listening to this webinar will know that you probably have a migrant in your life who is either a family member, a friend, or someone that you know. So migration is something that has touched all of our lives. People have been moving for centuries for different reasons, mostly, as people had said earlier, for a better life. And this morning, I hope to highlight for you some of the experiences that I've had the fortune of of sharing in my years as a journalist covering labor migration and the Filipino diaspora in Europe and the Middle East. If I may go to the next slide, please. So I will start over with, just to let you know what we're going to be discussing today. First will be an overview of the migrant situation. When we speak about labor migrants and people on the move, or migrants in general, how many people are we exactly talking about? And then I'll take you through how they are represented, how their stories are represented in mainstream media, and how these are shape opinions, perceptions, and also the narrative of migrants and how we see them. And then I'll take you through 2 case studies of labor or migrant receiving countries and migrant sending countries. And then we'll talk about the way forward, how we can better include the stories of migrants and their voices in the narratives that we hear today. So as an overview, there are about 272 million international migrants. That's about 3.5% of the world's population. If you look at the graph there, which is from the World Economic Forum and the IOM report on global migration, you'll see that there's a general increase of migrants, but it's mostly the same percentage of the population. So this is pre-COVID, I have to say, but this is just to show that people will always be on the move. Most of the migrants, as tracked by the study, show that they're from India, and the primary destination country is the United States. Can you go to the next slide, please? And as I always like to say, data is always stories with a soul. Okay, there's stories of other people's pain, there's stories of other people's tears. So what does this data tell us? You know, if you look at the reasons why migrants leave, their primary reasons cited were work, conflict, so they were forced to flee from their homes and their motherland because of conflict or war, and climate change. Again, this is pre-COVID, right? So let's just keep that in mind. But when we look at these reasons, it's mostly a mixture of economic, safety, and personal, very personal reasons that are beyond your control. But this compel and propel you to move. Can we go to the next slide? I just wanted to highlight also that global conditions, economic conditions, and world events will continue to force people to move from their homes. Now, going from that overview, let's look at how how migrants are represented in the European Union, which is largely a migrant receiving country. This was a result of a study that was done across media outlets in Spain, Germany, Italy, UK, and Sweden. The next slide will show you a sample of the headlines in the UK. And as I'm a writer, so I'd like to draw your attention to the language that's used in these outlets. Language is so powerful. It's the first signal to us how we see things, or how it's the first influence of how things are to be perceived. And therefore, it's very powerful in shaping our opinions. So look at the headlines. Please save us. Migrants try to kill Brit truckers. Send in army to halt migrant invasion. The words are very incendiary. Invasion, send in the army, killing Brit truckers, but also kind of draws your pity, right? Please save us. What did the study say about this kind of language and how it shaped the tone and the themes of the stories? On the next slide, you'll see that the word illegal migrant was used still in a lot of the stories. You see it divided by country in the slide. But I'd like to highlight here is when we use that term, you know, we know this in the discussion within the development community, that this term is no longer acceptable. Okay, it is undocumented migrant because no one is illegal and their movements are not illegal per se in this case. So the proper term is undocumented migrant. But when you see that certain media outlets are still using this word, it signals to us also how this shapes public opinion and how there's still that perception of migrants in a negative light. Let's look to the next slide for how this is dissected a little bit further in terms of the language, the tone, and the themes. So there was the language that was used was illegal migrant, as I showed you in the previous slide. That was still being used in a lot of outlets, but we see also refugees. So there was a mix of either feeling pity or disdain for migrants. The tone in the UK outlets was the most negative and polarized, and that has largely to do with the UK tabloids as well, but especially among right-wing media outlets. In terms of themes, there were some humanitarian angles, but mostly this was seen in the Italian outlets. And I think this is also largely because, Italy has come out with a set of guidelines about reporting for migrants. So I think there's a signal to the outlets to be more cognizant of how migrant issues are framed. But mostly migrants were seen or portrayed as being a threat to welfare systems. They're a threat to the culture of the receiving country. This was seen again, like mostly in Italy, Spain, and in the UK. Next, please. So in general, why? Why do we see also this kind of coverage? I'd like to hope to let other people also understand like what goes through media outlets and why this is also the case, right? First of all, there's little or no interest in migration stories unless human tragedy is involved. So it's a lot of on-the-spot breaking news reporting. We don't get to know a lot beyond the issue of, okay, migrants or refugees had to leave because of safety reasons or economic reasons. But who are they? There are a lot of these people, a lot of the migrants are just like you and me, who are looking for a sense of belonging and a sense of identity. But most migrant stories were framed around criminality, and that's linked to the first point. And looking at why this is so for a lot of journalists, this is dependent on the environment, obviously, and in the country that you report in. But in certain countries, it's also very dangerous right now for journalists to report in certain countries. And that also contributes to why it's a lot of, top line breaking news and very on the surface reportage of migrant issues. And also we know that the mainstream media is undergoing a huge shift in terms of structure. Media budgets are shrinking. There isn't a lot of space or time or resources for newsrooms to devote to covering migrant issues that are deeper than top line. What do we mean? Going through, issues that are investigative or that go into the lives of migrants take time and resources, which not a lot of newsrooms right now have. Next, please. But what are the opportunities? Apart from showing you the reporting gaps, there are also opportunities. And this is from the same study that I cited earlier. So it says that only 20% of the news items on asylum and migration reference a refugee or migrant. So they're not even quoted. Okay, migrants or refugees are not quoted. Less than half of the articles quote them directly. Sorry, if you may go back, please. Less than 40% of the articles quote them directly. And there are certain groups of people that are more invisible. These are mostly the women. And refugees and migrants are thus mostly identified by their displacement. What does this mean for all of us here? Well, first of all, that it's obvious that it means for storytellers and for journalists like me, that means that we need to make more effort in bringing out these voices of diversity of migrants. Disproportionately women are underrepresented, that's one. Secondly, but for those of us who are working in international organizations that have interface and access to migrants, that's also the thing, or that's also the point where journalists and international organizations can meet. Access points. If migrants are in refugee camps or labor camps, it's very hard to access them. That's also why there's not a lot of opportunity to reference or quote them directly. Now, by providing access or facilitating access to journalists and storytellers, this is a way that we can both address this major gap in reporting. Now, I'm going to bring you to another case study of a migrant sending country. My country is the Philippines, which is one of the largest labor suppliers in the world. There's no there's no ship that sails without a Filipino sailor, I'm told. And in many homes, in many hospitals here in the UK and then around the world, there is a Filipina or Filipino nurse or caregiver taking care of people who are most vulnerable, the sick, the elderly, and the young. So I take you to the representation of Filipino migrants. How are they seen in the Philippines and how are they portrayed? This is the slide that I'm showing here is from, sorry if I may go back. The slide is from a Facebook page that calls OFWs or overseas Filipino workers as the Philippines' modern day heroes. And the slide already shows you a lot about how, you know, the stories are framed around sacrifice to give a better life to their families, a hero to their families and country because they live to help others. Okay, so they're seen as heroes. Next, please. And I'd like to show you that there's coverage of Filipino migrants pre-COVID and during COVID. As I told you in the previous slide, the framing of Filipino migrants in the Philippines is from a modern day hero perspective. They are economic saviors of the country and their family. The remittances from over 100 countries in the world contribute to about 10% of the GDP. 10%. Okay, so that's why they're considered modern day heroes. But let's look at the word hero a little bit. You know, when you think about it, there's an element of being valorized, right? But also a very thin line that separates martyr and victim. Heroes had to go through excruciating circumstances to be called a hero. We shouldn't have to think of our migrants as having to go through such extraordinary circumstances of exploitation as well before they are considered heroes. The themes, like the media outlets also in Europe and in the Western world, a lot is about crime, about abuse, crime mostly on the side of recruiters, and on remittances, but also a lot of the framing again on sacrifice. So it's also very top line, breaking news when there's a deployment ban, when overseas Filipino workers are sent home, etc. It's very of the moment developmental reporting. Now, when COVID broke out, we saw quite a dramatic shift in the framing of modern day hero to vectors of contagion. You have to remember these OFWs were locked out or stranded in their destination countries, or they were stranded on ships. So when they were coming back, there was a lot of fear also that if they were coming back to the Philippines, they might be carriers of COVID-19. So that was we saw that as a very dramatic shift. There was also themes on migrant OFWs stranded on ships or their destination countries, and relatedly, the reports on drop in remittances and soaring unemployment rates. Next, please. As a reporter, there were a lot of challenges brought by COVID-19 in terms of accessing migrant stories, but there was also opportunities to let migrants tell their own stories. And with some creativity, I hope to show you other ways that this can be done. So I'm sharing with you a story of our Filipino migrant fishermen who were trapped on their ships and on their fishing vessels for about 2-3 months. Okay, just as a background, migrant fishermen they fish in the high seas and their feet do not touch solid ground for about a year or two. So these men, they're completely cut off from the rest of the world. And these men did not even know that COVID-19 had broken out. So when they were going home and they were very excited to go home and ready to get off the ship, their captain said, oh, there's been a lockdown, borders have been sealed, ports are closed. They didn't even believe it. They had no clue that a global pandemic had taken over the world. And they had no idea if the captain was just telling them that to keep them fishing and to keep them on board their ships. Now, what happened? We had to report this story, but how do we access these migrant fishermen on their shipping vessels? Under normal circumstances, it would already be very difficult to do so. But under COVID-19, it was even more difficult. Now, what we did for Rappler to try to communicate the story of an ocean lockdown, what does it look like when you're locked down in the middle of the high seas, in the middle of nowhere, and just waiting to go home? The fishermen got in touch with me through a Facebook group. I was helped by a labor advocacy group, Migrant International, and I asked them for photos, and videos or whatever they had. They put it in the Facebook group, and by putting together the interviews that I recorded with them and putting together their stories, I'm sorry, their photos and their videos, we stitched together a story of what their life was like on these ships, and compounded by the lockdown, which they didn't know when it would end. And I thought it was very powerful also because in the story, I hope you're able to access it later on. The video that we put together was a mix of animation to supplement the videos and the photos, but it was all the voices of the migrant fishermen speaking to tell their story. Second, next slide, please. Before that, thank you. And also, we saw a rise of, everybody was at home on lockdown and mostly online, and so were our migrant workers. So this story came out in April 2020, and this is a story of Brenda Dama, who's a Kenyan domestic worker, who talks about the difficult working conditions in the Gulf. So she's dancing to the song "Don't Got It," and while she's dancing, there are words that appear on the screen like acceptance by all family members. She swats it away. A single day off, she swats it away. It's just a few minutes, this video, but it's so powerful in being able to communicate across a wider audience what Miss Dama's situation is like as a domestic worker in the Middle East. And it highlights in very concrete terms, what exploitation looks like to her, what is important to her. The other words that come out are homesickness. And she says, oh, that I got that. And there's something about faith in Jesus. Yeah, that's what's keeping me together. And I thought it was such a creative way of looking at the migrant situation, both from these are the situations or the factors that lead to my exploitation, but this is also what gives me hope. It's such a short video, but I liked it so much because it was told from the migrant workers' point of view, and it was a refreshing balance of not just the exploitation, but also what makes Miss Dama strong. Just like you and me, right? She was experiencing homesickness, but it was her faith in God that was keeping her together. As of when she first released the video, it had 900,000 views and about 6,000 comments, and hey, it was picked up by the New York Times. So, next, please. So what is the way forward? What I hope that I've been able to impart with the few minutes that I have with all of you is that COVID-19 exposed what we already know. Migrant workers are exploited, but they are essential workers. I think that more than anything, that's what showed us, right? The clothes shops can close, the restaurants can close, but our groceries cannot, our petrol stations cannot. These are the essential workers, these are the essential services, and these are mostly where our migrant workers are working, and of course our healthcare systems as well. We need more stories that break down the barriers that separate us from migrants. When we look at the stories of, labeling migrants as illegal migrants or just painting them as other, there's a lot of context in that, that forces us to differentiate ourselves from migrants as them. They're poor, they're people of color, they're uneducated. I would never be like that, or that's not me. But what if we saw the other things that make us so similar? And just because we're all occupying the same space on earth, we want a better life for those we love. And a lot of us have to go through much more extreme measures to do that. What if those were the things that we highlighted? And we also wouldn't that also lessen the contribution to victimhood that we inadvertently also kind of portray migrants as? And lastly, let's democratize and equalize the storytelling. Journalists and researchers are not the only storytellers, as I've shown you through Miss Dama, as I hope to have shown you through the stories of migrant fishermen that we collaborated on. There are alternative ways of telling stories, movies, comic books, and yes, TikTok videos. I would love to see TikTok videos highlighted in academic research papers. I would love to see the migrants who are making a voice for themselves on YouTube, on TikTok, as part of panelists on talks like this. I would love to democratize the storytelling and see where it takes us. And lastly, migrants are essential workers. So it's time that we give them their essentials, their rights and protections, fair and just working conditions and wages, and balanced representation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ana Santos, for this very interesting presentation. It's very insightful and eye-opening analysis of the perception of the migrants and the difference between their depiction in the media and their reality. So I hope all our attendees benefit from the information provided. Now we're going to welcome Ms. Jenny, Maria Genevieve, DG Jenny. She's a radio host from the Philippines, and she will give us a presentation. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon or good evening and good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity and the invitation. I'm quite not well as a good speaker, but I'll try my best. Yeah, I would like to share. I was my life here in Korea as an immigrant, but 20 years ago when I come to Korea, there's a lot of difference as right now. So I came here in Korea with my 18-month-old son. I was married in Korea with a Korean in the Philippines. After thinking to give the best life I want for my son, I was thinking that if I stay in Korea, maybe I can give him a good education and support his needs. So upon arriving here in Korea, it's not what I expect. It's different. First of all, the troubles, the language, which I cannot speak English. I cannot speak Korean. All I knew is like 4 or 5 Korean words. And then I was living with my Korean in-laws, which is my mother-in-law and great mother-in-law. So first, I cannot go out in the house because I don't know where to go. I cannot read the characters. I cannot even buy personal things. So it took me a while to stay at home until I was able to go out and meet other people. But when I go out, I meet a lot of Koreans only because I cannot see any foreigners at that time. That's 20 years ago. There was a time that I went somewhere downtown, I meet a Filipina, and that's the very first time after 8 months arriving in Korea. I was very happy. So I asked her number, and very unfortunate, first time I met her, she is ready to leave for the US. So I don't have chance to meet her again. So she gave me a number that she told me there's a lot of Filipinos here in Korea. And I'm very surprised because we're living in Korea for like almost a year, I haven't met any foreigners except me. During my first year here, when I go out, I go to the public stores or convenience store, they will look at me with different color. They will say, oh, you're from the Philippines. Do you eat with spoon and fork, or do you have TV in your country? And at the time I was, what are why do they keep asking me that way? I mean, I don't know at the time. Then my eyes is big and they say, oh, your eyes is so big. So that's what I experienced. And then I tried to find a work because it's time to support my family in Korea. With the first work that I have is working in a manufacturing company. At the time I had the chance to meet both Filipinos, another nationalities, and Korean. But my Korean language at that time is very poor as well. So I experienced I experience and I see how Korean treated with the migrants worker, not only to me, but with all the nationality, then I feel so hurt, even though I cannot understand the language. I feel hurt the way they express. And I said, this is not what I want to be in the future, just to stay in Korea like this and to be treated like this. So I tried to educate myself. I started to join free Korean language classes. At the time, there's a lot of Korean language learning. When I have the chance to learn Korean during my day off, during my free time, then besides of that, I started to have volunteer work. So this is all the hardships and difficult that I experienced in my daily lives in Korea. I tried it into another positive way. So instead, I will pity myself. I learned the language. I do volunteer in the government centers, and through that volunteers, there's a door opening for me. So I joined a lot of community works and organization. Then I had a chance to use my knowledge to speak the Korean when there's a lot of Filipinos that they cannot communicate with their employers. There was a lot of domestic violence before when there is no foreign workers centers. No one can help with my fellow Filipino. So through my very little Korean language, I learned to fight to the Korean employer, to the husbands who beat their wives. I sometimes my home was a shelter. Fellow Filipino ran away from their husbands because they're hitting them. So through our organization, we work so hard to acknowledge that there's a lot of Filipino or married migrants that need support, need protections. And then through our language, we continue learning from it. So the discrimination and the difficulties of the culture, because we have this culture that very different at the same time, and the big problem was the language and the culture and the beliefs, and then all of us the access is limited. So through all that I learned, and I had given a chance to attend meetings, to learn educations, and then to voice our needs. And then around 2008 onwards, the Korea tried to listen the migrants, and they called us multicultural family. They even titled us in different way. From the Southeast country, they called us multicultural families. From the West, they called them global family. So our organization, use our voice. So since we can speak and understand the language, we help. So I have my own personal battles, and also I have a battles for my fellow women and children. Even our children experience discriminations, but we tried to 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 fight for it, and then we use our understanding of the language. We use our voice, so that through more our organization encourage us. And then when I was given a chance to guest the radio, even before the radio, I'm very noisy already, everywhere, to go everywhere, so I can seek help and I can seek knowledge for the welfare of the foreigners, from workers, from Korean married migrants, and other undocumented Filipinos. So when I had a chance to be the guest of a radio, and then it was just a guesting, and then the director told me, you have a beautiful voice, maybe if we need part-time, we're going to invite you. But when I heard the first Filipino radio DJ, she's ready to go back to the Philippines for good, I messaged the radio director. I told him, do you need a radio DJ? Even I don't have a journalism background, I don't have the educations about media, about speaking whatsoever, but I messaged him. So very lucky, he replied me and he said, okay, come to the office and I will interview you. When I go to the office and he interviewed me, I was say that I was not confident that I will be given a chance because I heard that all the other applicants are scholars, master's degree, and who I am, I'm just an ordinary, a mother, a manufacturer worker. But and then my work, I work as a foreign workers translator and a marriage migrants counselor and translator. So those are my jobs, like every day listening the problems of domestics and workers, translating. And through that, when I was hired, I was very happy because I thought I would not given a chance. I never make any single moment to waste that time when I had given the chance to become the representative of the multicultural family music broadcasting. I do everything that I know what the Filipino needs or our foreign workers needs. So I try to connect all the communities as much as possible, express everything, share the informations into our language so that every Filipino can have access and understand. So sometimes they name me in a different way. They sometimes call me Jenny Kim or DJ Jenny. Sometimes my name is Jenny Hospital, Jenny Translator, Jenny Court because they can see me everywhere. When I have given the chance for working in the multicultural family music broadcasting for more than 7 years, now is my almost 10 years. I was also had a chance to hire one of our big TV news company in the Philippines, which is ABS-CBN. I become part of the TFC News South Korea correspondent. This responsibility for me, that part of the media, it makes me more important that become the voice of the multicultural, of the being a migrant. I want to show everyone that information is free and you just understand it and you should know what is your rights and your protections living in this country, especially in this country, which is the language is very important. That's the number one of many issues because you cannot understand and you cannot express yourself. There was a lot of abuse because you cannot even defend yourself without learning it. So I had the chance to share every stories that my experience and other experience being not only as a radio DJ, a marriage counselor, a foreign workers counselor, an active Filipino community member, I'm also a single mother. A single mother life living in Korea. I'm at the same time I'm raising my son alone, like back and forth, doing my job, doing community work, and taking care of my son. I make sure that every second of my day, every second of my time is worth it. And those were those hardships. It also rewarding that some of my work has been recognized. I have some awards. I received some awards from the National Assembly in Korea for contributing Korean society. I received the awards for 2 times as a recognition. And my radio broadcast program is the first radio given award from the CFO, the first Hall of Famer. So I was very, very happy. I was given that chance, and I was also finalist of the Henry Lopez Bayani Award. And some of other communities recognize all my assistance to them. And as of now, this pandemic, it's really hard for everyone. Everyone experience depression, loneliness, everything here. So through our media, through my program, we are able to help or to reach out every Filipinos living in Korea. So, and even now in Korea is a very cooperative country. They give they cater everything that even foreigners to adjust here during this time of pandemic. Well, for me, I hope that even this have this comfortability way of communication here in Korea, because they give and they provide as much as many assistance to the foreigners living, working, and studying here. But I would like to continue inspire foreign women like me, a single mother from a factory worker and turns to a radio broadcaster. Do not stop learning, continue dreaming, and to be a voice to everyone. If you can say something, that's all I want to share to everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you, DJ Jeannie, if I may call you DJ Jeannie. Thank you for sharing this such an inspiring and impressive journey from the Philippines to Korea as a single mother, as factory worker, to become a voice for a multicultural voice for migrants, and until becoming also a foreign correspondent. So thank you very much for sharing your story. Now I give the floor to Dr. Magna Bhatt. She's an independent gender and social justice consultant, and she will tell us more about her journey as well. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And before I introduce myself and, do some acknowledgements, I just want to thank Ana Santos and DJ Jenny for sharing your beautiful, inspiring stories. I'm deeply moved by hearing your stories and how you overcome all the challenges and trying to, break the glass ceiling. So I appreciate each one of you. I also would like to thank the University of Philippines and especially the CIFAL Philippines and the United Nations Institute for Training and Research for this wonderful opportunity to be a part of this panel and the webinar. It's such a honor, to be here learning from my other esteemed colleagues in this panel. This is such an important topic that's often overlooked in mainstream narratives. So I'm honestly humbled to be here. My name is Dr. Meghna Bhatt. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And what I would like to do is I like to usually introduce myself in a very, in a little bit of a storytelling way. So if you can, hopefully you enjoy the process. Next slide, please. So I am a first generation immigrant from the chaotic city from Mumbai, India. I am the daughter of a school teacher in India and a self-employed entrepreneur. I'm an older sister to a brilliant, compassionate, kind, and beautiful sister, one of the best things that have happened in my life. I come from the land of spices, chai, street food called chaat, garam masalas, coconut water, and sugarcane juice. I come from the city of Sacramento currently in California, living as an immigrant in the city of trees and sunny weather. I also come as a foodie, an amateur acrylic painter, a brisk walker, and kind of a dancer. I am a storyteller trained in oral and digital storytelling from California. I come as an independent gender and social justice consultant, educator, and speaker. And not, last but not the least, I come as a feminist scholar, researcher, and a blended academic with a PhD, in criminology, law, and justice with a focus in gender and women's studies. But I feel I've come such a long way from being an academic to an immigrant who is really proud of my roots and my heritage. Next. So I would like to just, I know we have talked about different narratives and definitions of storytelling, right? And in terms of what I'm talking about storytelling, I just wanted to, give you an idea or a definition or a grounding, if I may, of what storytelling looks like. These are true and personal narratives. They are lived experiences of someone, who is going to be sharing it in first person voice, right? So these are not stories that are usually like I would have witnessed or I would have heard from a third person and then share it, saying that it's my story. It's basically true and personal narratives, lived experiences, and first person. And we have so much of as migrants and immigrants, we have such a rich, if I may say, rich, nuanced, and complex history and legacy, right? Of our journey, of our immigrant and migrant journeys, of our the struggles that we have overcome or we are still experiencing, especially during COVID. So I just wanted to frame it, within this definition. It's not necessarily the only definition, but for in terms of what I'm going to be talking today. Next. So I really love this quote. It's from this book, Digital Storytelling Cookbook. It's called, and I know this, every time I read this quote, it has this different meaning and there's so much to unpack, right? So I'm going to do justice, but I'm going to read it for people, so that we can see that. Is stories move in circles. They don't move in straight lines. So it helps if you listen in circles. There are stories inside stories and stories between stories, and finding your way through them is as easy and as hard as finding your way home. And part of the finding is getting lost. And when you're lost, you start to look around and listen. And I feel this quote by Corey Fisher is every time it gives me goosebumps, especially as a first generation migrant, immigrant, who is born and raised in India, been living in the US for 17 years, in many roles, the many hats that I wear, right? As a survivor of gender violence and street harassment, as a feminist scholar, I feel like these stories, it kind of relates to me. So I just wanted to share there's something for you to take back with you in terms of how our migrant narratives are out there, right? The migrant stories that need to be heard that are often overlooked in our mainstream narratives. Next. So I do have a polling question. I would like to know the audience a little bit better as well, since you're getting to know me. I would like to know how familiar are you with writing or even sharing stories with others, and are you very familiar, so, not familiar, or clueless? And there's no right or wrong answer here, just to get an idea of our audience. So if you could vote for a few seconds, and then we can share the response. So are we people participating? I just want to make sure.
Yes, they are.
Okay.
We so far have 30 answers.
Okay.
Yeah, 31 people are answered the question. I mean the poll.
Okay. Yes. Maybe another 2 seconds and then we can close the poll just to get an idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we have heard about, we are all storytellers, whether we know about it or not. We are, our voices as migrants and immigrants are so critical to creating social change, right? Whether it is before COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID, that's a huge transition. So I would like to see the results of the first polling question, Sarah. Great, thank you. So I see that 47% are familiar, about 32% are very familiar, which is amazing. And then 16% is so, and 5% is not familiar. Thank you so much. All of you all are amazing for being here, being a part of this conversation and dialogue. So thank you for participating in this poll. With that being said, in the next slide. So I would like to first frame about why storytelling is important, right? We all have heard of these different pieces and important voices and stories shared by, my esteemed colleagues in this panel. And I love the fact that we are focusing on different pieces of migrant storytelling. But in terms of why is storytelling important? Yes, research shows it has improved, physical and mental health, finding your own voice. It does influence public policy, It also leads to narrative and cultural change. But how it helped me as a first generation immigrant away from my family, my homeland, right, with an identity. And also, again, as I said, someone who has experienced street harassment and gender violence. It has helped me feel less isolated as a storyteller. It has inspired to be vulnerable and yet draw on my courage and strengths, and also helped me find a community of other immigrants and migrants, help me engage dialogues and conversations about how to create our communities free from violence, racism, xenophobia, sexism, and oppression, right? Storytelling, as I said, has helped people find their own voice, the same way I also feel the same, like I found my own voice, what my values are. And that's how I'm trying to use it to create the social change, shift narratives about gender violence among immigrants and migrants, specifically in those communities living in the US. Next. So we are aware of all the different forms of storytelling, and this is just kind of like a preview of how I came into digital storytelling and what it looks like, right? So there are different types of storytelling, and as I see that many of you are already familiar, so there are certain things like written stories, right? We do journaling. So then audio or oral voiceover stories, digital or video stories. And you may wonder like, hey, this can be, this can overlap. This sounds almost similar. And yes, some of these terms are used interchangeably, some can overlap. And this is not an exhaustive list. I know many of you have shared storytelling in very other different formats, right? That I'm not aware. So I would love to hear that as well in the chat if you have any other ideas. But this is just to give you a preview of how storytelling shows up in our communities. So so just to give you a very brief context, I learned digital storytelling about 3 years ago in an organization called Story Center, which is located in California. They are a nonprofit organization. They have online webinars, workshops, and trainings. They have free webinars, so I would definitely encourage you to check them out. I volunteered with them, I shadowed them, I co-facilitated, and I also finished my facilitator training. And learning about the digital storytelling process can take a whole 3-day workshop or at least a 90 minutes web conference on that process, right? But this process is also helpful to identify what story you want to share. So whether you're doing digital oral storytelling or you're just writing stories, right? This is always helpful to identify, hey, I have so many stories as a migrant or an immigrant. What part do I share? What story do I share, right? Sometimes it's confusing in our own minds, like which piece of the conversation is more important. And this process has always helped me. What's the story? Who do you want to share it with? And why do you want to share the story? And why share the story now? That's kind of the icebreaker, right? So I also want to let you know that who do you want to share it with? If you say, hey, I would like to keep the story to myself, it's just for me, right? It's for my own healing. And maybe at some point of time, I'll share it with my loved ones. That's perfectly fine. So you don't have to have an audience, but I just want to give you an idea about this, right? So digital storytelling is a short first-person video narrative created by combining recorded voice, still and moving images, music, and other background sounds. So it's a combination of these different elements of storytelling that we may be doing it in our day-to-day lives. So I just wanted to give you an idea of what the process looks like. So we have a second polling question as well. And I'm curious to know, what has been your exposure or experience with digital storytelling specifically? And again, as I said, like if you have not attended anything, this is the first time you've heard, that's perfectly great too. Like I'm just curious to know more about our audience and our participants who are here. So we'll give it a couple of seconds and then I would love to see the results. Meanwhile, if I definitely, as I said, I will share some resources at the end. But definitely, if you do have time, especially during COVID, when things have been so hard, but also the digital and Zoom world has, brought us together as a community. I encourage you to check out these free webinars, whether it's at Story Center, you may have another organization that you may have heard of, whether it's digital or any other forms of storytelling. I feel our migrant voices and stories need to be heard and be promoted and, brought into the mainstream narrative. So the result is about 34% said that you have heard of digital storytelling, but have never attended any event. Great. And then 17% you have said you've attended many webinars or trainings, or you were recently introduced to digital storytelling. And there was 31% said, this is the first time I'm reading or listening about digital storytelling. Thank you so much, thank you each one of you for participating in this poll. It's really good to know, what kind of information and awareness we have about this format of storytelling. With that being said, the next slide is a short film that I want to give some background before we play it. This is a part of the project called Stories of Home, which is a very special funded project organized by Story Center, which focused on immigrant, migrant, and refugee women and their stories, right? I was a part of one of the cohorts of Stories of Home, and we were each paired with a visual artist, a woman artist from California, who helped us give life to our stories. So if I'm the storyteller who has a voice, my story, my concept, the images and photos, or the vision I provided to the artist who was paired with me, and she was the amazing, brilliant, creative mind who brought vision to the story, who brought life to the story. So I hope you enjoyed, and if you miss it, I'll put the link in sometime. Thank you. Can we play the story, please? Thank you.
I think you need to share the sound as well, Sarah.
Yes.
Sorry. The sound is not working.
Yeah, we cannot hear it. So I think when you share it, you have to share sound, I think.
But run the film first, and then we'll know. Thank you.
Okay. Is it working?
No.
No, not yet. No.
Not working. Okay.
No. Once you start the YouTube film, then you need to go and share the screen again. So you need to stop this screen sharing now and then do it again.
Okay.
Yeah,
Got it. Okay.
Thank
no
you.
problem. One second, please, and I'll be sharing.
We cannot still hear the voice. Sarah.
Is it working?
No, we can see the picture.
Exactly, but we cannot hear the sound. So you just need to go on Zoom on top, hover over the top, and you will see a menu to the right. And then to the right, just open the drop-down menu. You will find share the sound. Share your computer sound. Yes.
Yes. Okay. Or maybe Dr. Bhatt, can you share the video from, if you can do it from your side?
Sarah,
Yeah,
I'm
I
trying.
can.
Yes.
Mhm.
Mhm.
1 second.
You can share. Yeah.
One second. I have it ready. Can you see the video?
Yes, we
YouTube?
can.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. Okay. I cannot believe it's been a year. We
Perfect.
weren't a perfect family. We had our share of struggles and conflicts. I loved spending so much time with you since mom and dad worked full time. Ai, mak bhook lagla, I would say after returning from school. You told me how tugal karte kale doodh kella. I happily sat and enjoyed my lunch. You knew me so well. I was not a fussy child. If you didn't have time to cook, I was at peace with this favorite dish. It was our tradition until I left for college. Remember when we traveled to Mangalore, our native place in Karnataka? We took a Volvo bus from Mumbai for Akka's wedding. I held your hand as I watched the villages flash by through the window. No wonder I got the passion to travel. Every year for my birthday, you made gulab jamun, my favorite sweet. And every July, I have spent my birthday away from you. I missed you and craved it, especially this year. Dad told us you were married at such a young age, so you could not complete your education. Yet, you did your best to read English newspapers and ask us questions. You always motivated me and my sister to study. You believed in us. Your two granddaughters are now educated, independent women. How is life there? You asked me when I visited home from the US. Your eyes sparkled with curiosity. You were eager to see life outside India through my stories and photos. I know you were suffering and in pain the past few years. Even though I saw you on video chat for a few minutes a week before you left us, I regret not telling you in person how much I love you. We miss you, Ai. Thank you, Sarah. You can share your screen now. Can you hear me?
Dr. Bhatt? Yes.
Yes.
So
Okay.
yeah, I'm sharing the next slide. One second.
No problem. Thank you. And I appreciate everybody's patience. Zoom is always fun in general. So thank you, Sarah. I would like to know if you have any reflections on the film. I do see some responses, and thank you, Catherine. How did you feel about the film? And it's not about like getting compliments. It's about in terms of our migrant lives and narratives, right? This story I had created in 2018. 2017 November, but I had created the story in 2018, a year after my grandmom had passed away, and I could not visit her, and I grew up with her. So it was really hard. So it was kind of, the story was in the form of a letter, right? And as we know, with COVID has been so much of loss, so much of grief, and so many additional struggles that we had never imagined that a pandemic would bring, right? It highlighted some of the disparities, whether it is in terms of our rights, in terms of traveling, visiting our families. So I just wanted to highlight some of those. If you have any other reflections on the story that I shared, feel free to put it in the chat. I also encourage you to check out the other stories that was in this. If you check Stories of Home and Story Center, you should be able to get the other stories. Each of them are beautiful, unique, and powerful and vulnerable at the same time. So I want to be, this is kind of like, this is a lot of information packed on the slide. It's about, migration, digital storytelling, and COVID, right? This is like, each of them is a separate topic on its own. But, and I know we are aware of that, in terms of the conversations, right? Whether it's migrant, immigrant, refugees, as Ms. Ana Santos mentioned that, there's this us versus them, which is documented versus undocumented. And those conversations are very harmful in terms of giving the accurate representation of the struggles and the barriers that we experience, right? Especially in terms of economic, labor, education, opportunities to work in a new country, away from their homeland. So I definitely encourage, whether you think of, whether you think of digital storytelling or any other forms of storytelling, if you're thinking of bringing it to your community, to your agency, to your family, to your schools, or you are planning to be a storyteller in any of these methods, I definitely encourage that. And again, not to put you in a spot, like not to make you feel uncomfortable, only if you feel you're ready to share the story, right? But it definitely will help increase diversity in migrant stories, narratives, and challenges. It will create more nuanced and complex representations. It will also help increase knowledge and empathy about other people's cultures and traditions, right? A lot of ignorance is out there, including digital storytelling and any other forms of storytelling will help us provide a deeper understanding of the nuances and complexities, as I mentioned. It will reduce isolation, especially during COVID, right? Many of us have not seen our families. Many of us have either visa restrictions that we could not see our families, especially during the pandemic. So it will help reduce isolation and increase community bonding. We will know that you're not alone experiencing these struggles. Some of the important considerations that I want to just highlight, it's not an exhaustive list, but I also want to let you know that storytelling in general should not be considered as a substitute for therapy or counseling, right? It would be recommended as a form of therapy or as a form of counseling treatment, but I would not, we definitely encourage, being mindful that storytelling is not the, substitute for counseling. And more importantly, if you have storytellers that you want to bring into these conversations, constantly getting their ongoing consent, right? About having their stories being shared in the story circle. So asking them consistently, asking them, hey, is it okay if we put this digital story, on YouTube? You give the consent, right? Or do we, would you like to not share it, with anybody else? That's absolutely fine. And also facilitating ethical storytelling process and maintaining confidentiality and anonymity. So if you're in a story circle, the stories that are shared there will stay there. Yes, if the storyteller says, I want it to be on YouTube or I want to share it outside, that's absolutely fine, but let them share it with the public, right? And also building trust with migrants, immigrants, whether documented, especially undocumented groups, is an ongoing process. It doesn't happen overnight, right? So I wanted to highlight some of these very important aspects. Again, this is not a confirmed list, right? This is just a few of them. And the last is language, visual, and spatial accessibility. The piece that I want to focus on is language. We as migrants, immigrants, and refugees should share a story in a language that we feel comfortable about, right? It doesn't have to be necessarily in English. So that's the other thing I definitely want to mention. We need to create more inclusive, safe spaces, bold spaces for our migrant and immigrant storytellers to share in a language they feel comfortable about, right? We can always add subtitles, have interpreters. So creating that setup is really an important piece of bringing storytelling in our communities. And the last slide. So these are some of the resources that I wanted to share, and I'm happy to, again, put the links in the chat after I'm done. My website is meghnabhat.com. I have done digital storytelling facilitation. So if you're interested in reaching out to me, I'm more than happy to talk about it. There are some of the other agencies that are doing that. Story Center, as I mentioned, is one of the organizations that I've been trained in. Capital Storytelling is where I've done oral storytelling, live performances in front of audience. That's just once, but it has been a great experience too. So definitely something for you to take home with you, and hopefully, explore, read more, and definitely I encourage you to think about it. We are all storytellers, again, as I mentioned, so don't feel any story is trivial. Your voice is very important, right? And with that being said, my last slide is just my contact information. If you do need to reach out to me, once again, I'm so thankful for this platform to highlight, one of the different ways of bringing migrant voices into our conversations and changing the narratives and, culture. Basically promoting the well-being of our migrants and immigrants in our communities. So thank you so much again, and back to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Dr. Bhatt. Thank you for sharing your expertise and knowledge of a multi-talented first-generation migrant with holding many hats, and also sharing with us the definition of digital storytelling and its importance and the impact that it can have on community, also to increase empathy and diversity, and as you said, reduce isolation, especially during this COVID pandemic. So thank you very much for your presentation. Now I give the floor to Mr. Itai Viriri, Senior Regional Media and Communication Officer from IOM, the International Organization of Migration. And the floor is yours. Thank you. Mr. Itai, you hear me?
Typically, after almost 2 years of Zoom and so on, we still unmute yourself. So I was just saying that thank you very much for this opportunity, to talk about this topic that for me, I suppose, it's been my life's work for the past, I would say, 6-7 years. So this is a great opportunity. And I must say also sometimes the pros and cons of being one of the last speakers is that you have the advantage of having learned from some really, really fantastic presentations that have gone before me. But also at the same time, it's a tough act to follow. So hopefully you'll be able to get something from my presentation. Basically, I'm going to talk about a situation that prevailed in 2015. Those of you who follow a lot of the media discourse on migration know that in 2015 we had these huge numbers of migrants trying to get to Europe, mostly crossing the Mediterranean. And as such, that was a starting point for us. So I don't know if the presentation... So I think you saw already from Anna's presentation a snapshot of some of the really toxic messages that came out in the media. So I just put a snapshot. I mean, these are mostly UK media who are quite, as you know, quite vociferous when it comes to migration. And that was the context. And at the same time, we were also dealing with an increasing number of migrants dying, trying to cross the Mediterranean to Italy, the southern Mediterranean, then get to Western Europe. And this was something that was quite obviously heartbreaking. I mean, we're talking of record numbers of migrants dying, and these were the only ones that we could record. There were many others we suspect, for example, those crossing from West Africa to North Africa, crossing the Sahara Desert, who were never recorded. So this was the context, and I'm talking again around 2015. So we decided, well, with all these toxic narratives, and of course, we're not naive. I mean, narratives about migration, especially in the developed world, have always been mostly negative, unfortunately, as you have heard from the previous panelists or speakers. So we decided, okay, this time as the UN agency for migration, we should be doing something proactive. Apart from our work that we do, I mean, IOM, those of you who know, we are a humanitarian agency across the world. I mean, we're usually the first respondents to any humanitarian emergencies or disasters, but we also do quite a lot of management of migration. So the challenge really for us was, as you can see in this image here, you have there the family, a middle-class family in, say, UK or Germany, watching the news, seeing these boats, and I think you've seen some of these really terrifying and really sad instances of human beings like you and me being packed on these unsafe boats trying to cross the Mediterranean. So they're seeing that on the TV, but at the same time, and that's how the public perception is given out in those developed countries. But at the same time, we were also tasked with informing the migrants who were looking at those kind of same images, thinking, okay, that's my way out of the poverty, out of danger, out of persecution. That's how I can get to Europe. So we had a two-pronged challenge, how to come up with a better perception of migrants, but also inform migrants who are still in, let's say, West Africa or North Africa, that, you know, this is irregular migration, which is quite dangerous. Coupled with this was also the issue of xenophobia, which again, as I said, was quite a significant element around this time. So we decided then, okay, let's see what we can do. So we looked around. I was tasked in IOM, I was in HQ at the time in Geneva. I was tasked with looking around and seeing what was out there, because normally you don't need to invent something new. There's usually always something that you can either partner with or come up with a new concept. So maybe next slide, please. In the UK, there was this campaign for migrant workers. They had what they called the movement against xenophobia. They started this campaign of showcasing stories of immigrants who were in the UK. So they had quite a nice cross-section from all over the world, people working in various careers, doing all sorts of voluntary work. And we then spoke to this agency in the UK. At the same time, in the US, we were also talking to Storyco. I think that's the next slide. Storyco, some of you, maybe I think Magna maybe might be aware of this one. It's a well-known series by NPR, where they do this amazing podcast for just any ordinary Americans or migrants living there. The concept is that you talk to, you have a conversation about life with a loved one or a friend, and it resonated quite well. I mean, I think it's still ongoing. I think it's probably several years on now. And we spoke to them and they gave us tips and ideas of what to do. And the result of both these conversations was, maybe next slide, please. I'm a migrant, which basically the concept is quite simple, because, and I think Anna referred to this quite a bit, the challenge is always who owns the stories. Do other people tell your own stories, or would you rather that you controlled the narrative, you tell your own story? And as a result of that, we were able to come up with a simple concept where people would log in from anywhere, from all walks of life, would log in and would type in their own stories, whichever story they wanted to share, whatever element about their journey, without any sort of direction from us in IOM and our partners. And the result was, over a period of maybe a year or two, we ended up with over 10,000 stories. Now, not all of them obviously are posted on the website, but we have several thousand that are there. And it started off quite small, but it generated a lot of interest. A lot of media entities ended up using this platform as a place where they could get real life stories, people talking about their own experiences of migration. And the simple concept was that you sort of identified where you are from or the country that you were born in, and then where you were at that particular time. So it created quite a lot of interesting stories, and you can see all of them if you go onto the website, which I can share later. You will see so many of them. We created posters, and it was one of those campaigns that really touched all the corners of the world. We had posts from Vanuatu to northern parts of Canada, the furthest region of Russia, to the southernmost part of South America. So really quite expansive in terms of the reach. We also tried, obviously, to make sure that we had French and Spanish, because IOM's official languages are English, French, and Spanish. And I think there are some other elements, if you go through the website, where there are other languages also that are covered. So this was the result of this, but the interest was quite significant. I mean, it was surprising. And I think maybe Meghna would have probably come across this in her work, which I think is so fascinating from listening to her, that it's quite strange that sometimes you find that people do not have easy access to telling stories. You assume that it's easy, just go onto a website and write. But sometimes people just need a little guidance to say, listen, there are these resources where you can tell your own stories. And in many cases, we found out that, yes, that's what people wanted, and then they could do it themselves. And that was the reality for us. This poster here that you have, I mean, we even had individuals like the former World Bank president, who was originally from Korea. He agreed to post a story. We've got a couple of Hollywood actors, Jimon Hunsu and so on, who were also happy to share their stories there. So it certainly resonated. Again, it's one of those things that you think, it's obvious, really. I mean, obviously people want to tell their own stories, but why is it not happening? People could write blogs, or they could do Tumblr or whatever, but the main element that came up was that people also, yes, I want to write the story, but I want people to read it. If I write it on my blog, if I don't have any reach, then, the story doesn't go out, if I want it to go out, that is. So with this platform, I think we also have, obviously, an associated Facebook page, Pinterest page, I think, Instagram, and Twitter. So we're able to share all these stories globally. And as I said, there was a lot of media pickup. This story is particularly poignant for me because I actually traveled from Geneva to Ghana to meet Emmanuel, who I think, I don't know if the text is large enough for you to read, but it was one of those really compelling stories. I mean, I'm a migrant myself, but I'll be one of those who can straight up say that, I was fortunate. I migrated, the usual way. I was able to go to Ireland from Zimbabwe. I didn't have to get on a boat. But the story that he told me, I heard it many times, but it was my first time someone putting it, like that quote there. I suppose I'm one of those who almost made it. You don't hear much about migrants like me because we didn't die at sea or in the desert. That is quite, self-explanatory. But what he's saying is that, yeah, I tried to get to Europe. We were caught by Tunisian authorities and sent back to a prison in Tunis, and was then rescued by IOM, and IOM usually then supports that person to go back home if they can. But his point was that, well, most people don't care about my case. They would rather hear about those migrants who have died, who have drowned in the sea, because it's a tragedy. It makes news. Everyone is interested in that. But my story is not the one that ever reaches, a global audience. So for him, this was an opportunity. And I'm glad to say, actually, I've been in, this was 2015. Since then, I've been in touch with Emmanuel a few times. He qualified for this IOM reintegration project. He started a business, selling vegetables in the market, and then doing a few, creating little household goods. And I'm glad to say that he's doing quite relatively well. And he hasn't tried since then to try to migrate irregularly to Europe. But that was, again, a good example of how the platform was able to be used in this manner. And certainly for us, I think the challenge has always been, especially now in COVID. I should explain also that this I'm a Migrant series is currently on hiatus. I mean, unfortunately, what usually happens when someone who's very dedicated to this runs it, and then they move on, sometimes the interest sort of wanes a little bit. But I'm glad to see that our Spanish-speaking offices around the world have actually started using it. So if you go to the website now, most of the posts now are in Spanish. I'm hoping that there will be a series, and in fact, I'm hoping to push my colleagues in HQ to see if we could start doing a series on the effects of COVID on migration. I can give you some simple statistics. I mean, thanks to Anna for giving out some of the statistics that we've also published in recent past. But one quite stark statistic that you may have seen is COVID has left anything up to 3.5 million migrants stranded around the world. Stranded as in, you know, when all the borders closed and people couldn't move, those were migrants that reached out to IOM for help. Obviously, we couldn't help all of them, and we had to rely on governments to help their own citizens or host governments to try and help. But those people also have a lot of stories. Unfortunately, quite a lot of them very difficult, hard, but stories that still should be heard if ever this is going to happen again. And I'm sure, unfortunately, we will probably have another pandemic the way things are going. We know what to do. We know how to look after migrants who, in many cases, are the most vulnerable in this kind of situation. Even though we've seen, again, I don't need to tell all of you tuning in, that migrants have also been at the forefront of helping communities deal with COVID. I was on BBC and CNN a few months ago talking about this, and one of the most devastating statistics to come out of the pandemic so far was the point that 4% of all nurses in the United States, for example, are Filipino, and yet 25% of registered nurses who have died from the pandemic are Filipino. That's a staggering statistic. And that's something quite close to my heart. I mean, I spent 3 wonderful years in the Philippines, so I'm very close to that community. I love Manila, the whole country. So I remember saying that on the news, and the presenter saying, but that cannot be. I said, yeah, that's the reality. That's what happens when the people who are actually out there saving lives, trying to be the front line to this pandemic, are not actually well looked after. And those are the people who should be telling their stories of what COVID has done, but also what they have done to protect society from COVID, to make sure that all these societies are functioning. For me, if I can conclude on that, that's the next big story that we need to hear, and not being told by the huge media companies, but by the migrants themselves. Because as they say, I think one of the presenters mentioned the heroes. Migrants have really been heroes, and we want to see and read those stories from their own voices. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Itaiburi from IOM for sharing about this really interesting initiative to change the narrative with a simple concept of sharing story from the migrants themselves. And also what attracted my attention is there's this title on this website, Migrant, Refugee, Expat, Diaspora. So how we can make the difference, we're all migrants. So thank you all for sharing your presentations and your knowledge and expertise. Now I would like to take some of the comments that we received from the audience. One person said the distinction people make between expats and migrants discriminating against the latter also needs to be broken. I don't know if you have any comments or regarding this quote from one of the attendees.
Thank you very much. That's a very important question, and one that we've grappled with quite a lot. We rarely use the term expat in IOM deliberately. Partly for the same reason that the colleague was sent in the question, because already it creates this demarcation that experts are usually, Western, European, American, or whatever, from the developed world, and migrants are usually, those of us from the global South. Obviously, that's the perception, but that's not the reality. So we usually stick to migrants or immigrants. And we have a definition that is anyone outside their locality of origin. Because remember, migrants are not just international. If you are from Mumbai and you move to Delhi, you are an internal migrant. In fact, I don't know if I have an opportunity to ask, but if I was to do a pop quiz now, can anyone tell me the largest migration in the world? It's in China. It happens every, I think when they celebrate the New Year, I think 400 or something, 400 up to half a billion people travel. Obviously, they haven't done that because of COVID, but that's the largest migration. And there's usually a huge series in Chinese media when that happens. That's internal migration, but it's still migration. So we're very careful not using that term expat. It's just put there in that slide because it encompasses, it's one aspect of the migration experience, but we rarely use it unless if to make a point like I'm making now.
Okay, thank you. And there's another participant who addresses a question to DJ Ginny. Can you share with us an important, valuable story that you heard from a migrant in Korea? Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. Actually, there's a lot of valuable stories of migrants here in Korea, especially these days now. Korea is embracing migration and diversity. So there's a lot of valuable stories, migrant stories in Korea. But I would like to share one of the valuable stories that I've been witnessed for the last 20 years, which is the first Filipina, the first naturalized Filipina who became the National Assembly Congresswoman in Korea. So she was experienced a lot of questions and hateful comments because she is not pure Korean. And that's the first time it happens here in Korea. So through her, every Korean tried to, not all in favor, not everyone is happy, but it was her. I know, I understand her that she may be gone through a lot, but she stands tall and she was able to contribute to the society, especially for the foreigners, for the migrants, and she shared a lot of changes of Korean law through migration. That's one of the valuable stories I would like to share.
Thank you very much. So I don't see any other questions. So before closing, I would like to thank you all for all distinguished panelists and speakers for sharing wonderful stories and very interesting expertise about storytelling on migrants. I would like also to invite you to switch on your cameras so we can take a picture if this is possible. Just look at the camera and take a picture. Thank you. Thank you. Done. So without further ado, I thank you very much for this really fascinating and insightful webinar. I thank also all those who attended this webinar, and I wish you a nice evening, wonderful day, and afternoon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Dr.
Everything.
Bat, Jenny, Anna, we love you. Wonderful. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Salamat po.
Salamat po. Good night po. 감사합니다. 사랑해요.
Bye.